Great to see you, Will. For our listeners who couldn't be here and attend your session, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and Plandek itself?
Yeah. So Plandek is a software engineering intelligence platform. I like to think of it in some ways, if best way to explain it is almost like Google Analytics, but for software delivery. So it plugs into the variety of tools that teams use, extracts data, and helps kind of, from teams all the way up to leadership, understanding, where are we focusing our time, how efficient are we delivering, and sort of kind of, what opportunities do we have to continue to drive a kind of improvement in the way that we deliver software.
You've had over 15 years experience in digital transformations. What are the kind of key lessons that you've learned along that journey?
It's a very good question. And certainly the last 15 years, plus the time I've spent at Plandek working with a lot of our customers, a lot has changed, a lot has evolved, and AI certainly is speeding that up even more. So I think one of the critical things that I've always learned is, and I took this from somebody I used to work for formerly who might listen to this at some point and smile, but he always said that incremental improvement is always preferred over postponed perfection, right? So having the courage to find the right ideas, test them out, learn, fail fast, learn quickly to deliver is probably one of the most important things that I've learned, and I try to continue to instill in my teams of be brave, but be quick about it. Um, that's probably one of the key ones that I've taken away.
I mean, as you think about your journey with Plandek, it puts you in a unique position of running a software business and all the operational considerations that go with that. But a software business that is focused very much on helping others to instrument their business and understand how to improve their own processes. What are the kind of unique challenges that you face in having that dual role there?
It's a great question. I mean, because in theory, one would think that, if to build SEI tools, you guys are naturally going to be very, very good and strong at delivering it. But we face many of the same challenges that our customers do. Cultural elements of it, different people have different philosophies and different understandings of how we want to work, how we should work, how do we use data, what value does data have, how conclusive it can be, how do you deal with attribution of data in different points. And so when I think about our clients, versus our role in this thing, I think we do benefit from delivering software into a software community that has immense amount of benefits. But when I look at the software community as a whole and the engineering community as a whole, we are still very much on a sort of long journey to be able to really utilize data very efficiently and using it as a good mirror to reflect, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What can we learn from that data? How do we then take some of those lessons learned and really drive meaningful change that enables us ultimately to deliver the kind of outcomes that we're looking for our business and for our customers?
I mean, the fundamental value proposition is improving productivity, effectiveness of an engineering team, effectively measuring productivity. Now, if ever I want to start an argument with a technology leader or an engineer, how do you measure productivity? How do you kind of think about what matters and goes into that in terms of how you baseline this?
We've thought a lot about this, especially over the last couple of years, as productivity as a theme has become more and more focused for a variety of different reasons. And software engineering gets compared to car manufacturing all the time. It's nothing like car manufacturing. Car manufacturing benefits and the ability to count how many cars you have coming out the end of the line at the end of a day, end of a week, end of a quarter, and then what you can then deliver into the market, turn into revenue. Software engineering is far more complicated and nuanced than that, right? You can count throughput, you can count tickets, but we all know that there are innate challenges and complexities with that because those units aren't consistent across a variety of teams, let alone across different companies. So the way that I think about productivity comes back to a very basic principle, one that is very often used in private equity, which is the relationship between the costly investment of your R&D function and the revenue that it drives, right? Now, naturally, you want to be able to continue to drive more and more revenue, more and more value to your customers at an ever more, more efficient cost base, let's say. Okay. Now, when you think about that as a function of time, right, we think about it as kind of three pillars, really, of kind of how you utilize engineering time. One is the amount of time that you focus on essential work that needs to be done. So if you work in banking, sort of regulatory work, compliance work, technical debt work, this is work that you definitely need to focus on. The next bit, of course, is unplanned work. So the surprises that come up, as well as maybe the time that you're spending on support and maintenance type work. And then lastly is the efficiency with which you deliver. And the way that we think about productivity ultimately is with those levers that we have to pull, how do we reduce the amount of unplanned work? How do we drive more efficiencies in the way that we deliver? How do we maintain the focus that we're going to plan on for certain types of work, compliance work, regulatory work, so that ultimately we're able to maximize the amount of time that we have to drive customer value? Now, to do that, we think about things around the four pillars that we launched this year. And it's really about driving the right focus. So are we working on the right things? Driving speed to market. So are we operating as efficiently and quickly deliver value to customers as possible? On quality, naturally, and not only from we want to build a quality product with low defects. Obviously, that's the case, but driving better understanding of, if you make a decision between delivering this story versus this bug, naturally that story is always going to get priority. But then those bugs are going to continue to build up and build up and build up. And the cost to a business of actually going back and fixing those bugs in a backlog is going to get more and more expensive the longer that you wait. So helping people start to think about quality, not just in terms of the quality of the product, but also the quality of how you're using your engineering capacity as well. And lastly is predictability. So for us, it's the predictability, speed, quality, and focus that underpins productive teams in a way that productivity means you're able to maximize the amount of value you can deliver to your customers at a much more efficient cost base underneath.
We're gathered here this week with all of the technology leaders across the HG portfolio to look at the kind of next disruptive wave of generative AI, where that takes us. And today we've been discussing how that technology helps you accelerate and play the game better, but also how you redefine and change the game. So, as you think about that change coming through in the software engineering space, what does that change to the kind of things that you measure? What matters? How you think about productivity in that new paradigm?
We've spoken a lot about this recently, and use an example. Say you're running a product today, right? And you make deployments to your production environment once a month, right? Adopting Gen AI in improving the sort of execution of tasks and being able to deliver things much faster ultimately isn't going to make a big difference to your business if you're still only be able to deploy once a month, right? In fact, if anything, you're just going to be deploying bigger releases and adding more and more risk. So I think there's two waves, or at least the way that I think about it, there's two waves of generative AI and agentic AI that our customers are thinking about. We are certainly thinking about this at Plandek as a product team itself. One is, the sort of generative AI tools, your GitHub Copilots, and that is really about helping you improve task execution, right? Now that's going to drive some level of productivity. We can debate what that number is, and everyone seems to have a very strong opinion on what they think that number is. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're still sticking with a human-based paradigm of software delivery. What you're doing is helping those humans improve productivity by 10%, 15%, 20%. Whereas agentic AI really changes things entirely because it reshapes what it is, what a product team actually looks like, right? In some ways, you might say that the SDLC is going to be kind of consumed by the actual PDLC. The agentic AI becomes the PDLC because product folks working with an engineer and working with some SMEs internally are able to generate, code prototypes much faster, get your production code ready much faster. And that's going to be really transformative in the way that we start to think about what a team is, what a team needs to be, and therefore what you can actually deliver into your customers using that new model. So it's very kind of transformative in the way that I think on the first one, with the generative AI tools, it's more about sort of sticking with the same model of a team, but just helping that team improve. Whereas the other one is going to completely leapfrog and change the complete dynamics of what you need. So in that sort of, again, formula of revenue to cost base, it's going to absolutely collapse the cost base and drive a lot more value into your customers.
We spoke this morning about the marginal cost of software dramatically decreasing, the kind of cycle times it takes to get to market again, just so much faster, orders of magnitude faster. It's tracking towards an age of software abundance, as Russell Kaplan from Cognition said. But as you kind of think about that, it is just having more software always better, or how do you think about the commercial impacts and measuring that level of productivity?
You're right. If we continue to operate in the model that we have today, I think, and you take the same size of teams and you break them up and you give them all the agentic tools, you're going to have a load of software going in, and it's not necessarily going to result in a good customer experience, quite frankly. I think with the changing dynamics of the team, one thing that we're going to really have to focus on, all of us, is being very, very clear on the business outcomes we're trying to drive. Revenue outcomes, retention outcomes, churn outcomes, feature usage outcomes, being very, very, very clear about that. So that we're very clear that when we are able to build this feature, build this feature, build this feature, it all is very clearly directly correlating into the outcome that we're trying to drive, and not just spray and praying a whole bunch of new features into production, which, customers in reality don't want a load new features because it can then just complicate the UI of itself. What they want are features that are going to drive value to them. The value is recognized in terms of the KPIs that you want to drive. So I think being very clear on those outcomes from the outset and making sure that the teams are building specifically for those is going to be where I think a lot of focus needs to pivot towards.
One of the big misconceptions for a long time has been that volume of output equates to productivity. Really, it sounds like you're talking about a shift there to much more commercial outcome, impact-driven measurement of productivity.
100%. I think the impact is ultimately where the focus needs to be. Shipping more and more features, as I said before, is not going to be particularly valuable. That's not going to translate into a positive business outcome. But understanding your customers, involving your customers in those processes, even involving your teams, even your customers within those agentic teams that you build, right? That's going to allow you to then build the features that are really going to move the needle ultimately in terms of customer satisfaction, which then will translate into it. But outcome impacts, those are the things that I think, for our business for sure, and what we're doing with our clients at the moment, that's where a lot of our focus is making sure that, understanding the SDLC is fine and we can optimize it, but really ultimately, how is that translating to the business outcomes that matter?
So in an environment where AI is really disrupting and redefining the software development lifecycle, Plandek's in quite an interesting position in that some of the things you measure today will inevitably matter much less in future. I think that there's new areas will start to come through as to how you measure value coming out of those AI agents. So as a software leader, how do you think about your own roadmap and staying current and ahead of this trend when you've got such external disruption coming in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two parts to that for us. There's no doubt agentic, with our own business, it's had a huge impact in terms of how we are going to be delivering going forward. For example, 50% of our roadmap this quarter is going to be delivered with agentic tools, right? So we are already seeing that impact within our own teams, and we're seeing that impact with some of our customers' teams. Think about the SDLC. Traditionally, it's been very much a human discipline, right? You have different human actors working within a delivery team, from product developers, testers, so on and so forth. They work in concert to ultimately deliver changes into production. The new model is going to change the way the dynamics of that team work. Now, that's not going to influence everyone. There's going to be some engineering teams out there that are slow to adopt. Some of our customers haven't even started utilizing some of these tools yet. Other customers have, and that's had an impact on certain parts of their R&D organizations and how their teams are particularly shaped. So we're trying to keep a very strong view of what does the team of the future look like, right? Understanding how it's impacting us, how it's impacting our customers. With what we spoke about previously, it's maybe having a little bit more of a focus on understanding the outcomes you're trying to drive and the impact that you're trying to have, and different data points behind, how people are interacting with agents as opposed to humans interacting with each other. Whilst at the same time being mindful that there are most organizations today have yet to really step into that journey, right? And so the product will continue to service that element. But I think, it's a very good question in the sense that software delivery is going to look very different a year from now, 2 years from now, whether people change or there are new entrants that come into the market that then either, force those people to change, or other eventualities that could be less fortunate to them. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it at the moment, is one, having a mind of the future and building a product that's going to be relevant and answering those questions around objectives, impact, and the interactions with agents, whilst at the same time still being mindful that, the traditional SDLC will exist for, say, a number of years still to come, I think.
We've talked quite often about the types of changes people might make in their SDLC to really capture the benefits and accelerate, which you get to see and measure as you work with your customers, but equally you get to deploy internally. Where you've seen people deploy these capabilities in a mature way, what kind of acceleration are you seeing across the HG portfolio and more broadly?
So, like specifically the sort of AI tools themselves, deploying those AI tools,
Well,
or
it's AI tools, but also how they take the insights they can get from Plandek
right.
and really leverage that to define their particular bottleneck, move process forward.
I think it's a good question. So I think generally there's kind of two areas the most client, well, three, let's say three areas that most clients benefit from. One is an understanding of where are we spending our time, right? You've got a lot of resources at play that you can put and tackle a lot of different challenges. What proportion of that time is actually focused on generating revenue for your business, right? Versus keeping the lights on, versus support maintenance, versus technical debt, versus compliance. That's one of the key areas, one of the key insights in terms of, we plan for this, are we actually sticking to that, and what do we need to do to change that? Number two is just the general flow, and I use flow as a very general term here because it's not only about things like your deployment frequency and how often you can get changes into production to your customers, but leading up to that, how efficiently are you able to go from idea all the way to production, right? It's a lot of tools that really focus on the SDLC aspect, but from when an engineer starts working until that's in production, typically it's only about 20% most of that overall timeline. So where a lot of the value comes in is people understanding what part of the ideation process, the design process, but also the development and testing process are they struggling with at the moment? Where those bottlenecks lie, and then giving them, some tangible data that they can go off and actually improve certain aspects of the PDLC and the SDLC. And then I think the last part is really around predictability. We published our benchmarks recently, and one of the things that stands out, particularly around the predictability metrics, is teams still struggle, admittedly, with planning and executing. Right, very simple. Can we do what we say? Right. Um, And so I think where tools like Plandek can really help is at the team level, all the way up to, organizationally, we can understand what is our predictability and how good are we at our kind of say-do ratios. At a team level, you can understand exactly what's driving that, right? Whether it's inability to plan efficiently in the right first place, or having to deal with things coming from production or downstream testing, or, other things coming into play. What's distracting us? Because teams, still fundamentally are not particularly good at planning and executing 2 weeks of work, right? And the reason isn't necessarily their fault. It could be poor understanding of what our product roadmap is, what the priority is, poor planning in the first place, poor understanding of the goals, poor management of scope creep that's coming into those things. So I think those are typically the kind of three areas. Where are we focused? How efficiently are we working? And ultimately, can we do what we say we're going to do?
And I think the benchmarks are really key there. So as an investor, we love benchmarks. It's really informative as to where we are today, but more importantly, what's the size of the opportunity? Where should we focus on what's going to move the needle most for us? How do we help operational leaders move their organization forwards? Are there any kind of key trends that you see as you start to work with a new customer and where they start out on the journey, and then the kind of things they typically work through, and how much they can improve as they go along that journey?
Yeah. So I'll answer the first part of that. I think is key trends that we see for the benchmarks this year. We've been doing it now for a number of quarters, number of year. And what is interesting, and part of this is influenced by Gen AI tools, and part of it is just the top performers are getting better, and the lower performers are staying the same. So the gap is continuing to widen. Now, the variety of reasons why that is, but in particular, we can see that within speed to market. Faster teams are getting faster. And again, with the help of Gen AI, with the help of agentic tools. But I think principally at the understanding, these are teams that have a really good understanding of what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, and are able to react to those quite quickly and to constantly improve how quickly they can deliver. With new customers, the biggest bit of advice that I can give to anyone going on this journey of using SEI tool or data as part of improving engineering efficiency, your leaders need to be very clear with what the outcomes that they're trying to drive are, right? Um, metrics for metrics sake doesn't get embraced particularly well by teams, right? But to have a very clear set of outcomes, and it doesn't, they don't have to be, if you look at the 4 pillars, we want to be focused on the right things. We want to deliver as efficiently as we can. We want to maintain quality. We want to be predictable. None of those are controversial, but they do help, number one, in setting a theme of this is direction to travel. This are the things that we want to aim for. And this is how we're going to measure where we are on that journey. Customers that have a very clear view of those objectives from the outset have a much higher success rate in terms of adoption and the results, whereas leaders who maybe are still working through what those objectives are, tend to have teams that kind of, okay, well, once you understand how you want us to use this data and what outcomes you're trying to drive, let us know. And so it's a real big influencing factor on adoption.
And I mean, given all your experience driving transformation, you play the role of data provider, but also to a degree kind of consultant, and shoulder to cry on. So here's where we are today. This is what I'm trying to solve for. But how does Plandek get somebody to that really actionable bottoms up plan that goes very specifically for this team? These are the top 3, top 5 things they need to do to drive that outcome.
Building software for software teams, training is quite easy, right? Technologists know how to use a web interface. They know how to use drop downs, tick boxes, all of the elements on a page that you would see. So training of the product is easy. Training engineering teams how to really think about data and use data and understand what questions to ask is more difficult. And so that's why, we made a decision very early days. We're not going, our customer success folks, we're not going to hire historically the same sort of customer success folks. All folks in our team and customer success all come from delivery backgrounds. So they either form engineering or delivery leadership. So they bring that history with them in terms of how do we then have the client conversations, because train a team in a week or 2, but then the next phase of that adoption is really about, okay, do you understand what's happening in this data? So there's a number of features we're investing in that will help a little bit on that journey. A lot of the conversations that we have on a regular basis with our customers is really around the value proposition of how do I get value from this data? How do I understand how to use this data? How do I understand how to drive improvement? And with some of our clients, we actually have a health check service, right? So it's kind of every 6 months, we do an independent audit of your teams, of your data. Having a position of independence helps, but also we know your teams, we know your challenges, we know a bit about the architecture, so we know what to expect in the data and what means what in that data. And we publish the report to the CTOs and the teams that basically say, okay, over the last 6 months, this is what you've done well. And over the next 6 months, these are what we think, for this team, for this product, these are the things that we think you should be focused on as the next obvious bit of improvement to make to really kind of move the needle on how you're delivering.
I think that improvement over time is really the critical bit of, okay, we are wherever we're starting from. So there's the lens of Plandek tracking my execution at building software. But I think it's equally important that there's the lens of Plandek of how am I doing at driving the change that will ultimately drive performance improvement. So what advice would you give to engineering leaders who are just starting out on their journey of understanding the performance of where their team is, putting together that kind of performance improvement plan, transformation plan, however you want to think about that, of these are the specific things we need to drive. How will we track that we're getting better? What works and what doesn't?
So when we work with new clients in that situation, there's the temptation to, hey, we just want to let the teams decide for themselves. And I get that in terms of empowerment of teams, but if the teams are not well versed in using data historically, then it's a new muscle that they need to learn how to build. So I always recommend to any engineering leader is, start with a clearly defined outcome that you're trying to drive, but start small. Right? Don't throw 100 things that you want to measure. Start with maybe 2 or 3 very simple points, right? All based on driving a particular outcome. Okay. So we want to deliver as efficiently and predictably as possible. That could be an example of an outcome, right? So what are we going to measure? Well, we're going to measure our lead time to value, idea to production, and we want to measure our deployment frequency, our cycle time, and let's say sprint predictability, as an example. Those 4 metrics. What's helpful there is you set the scene for your teams in terms of this is what we're trying to achieve. here's a good starting point for the kind of key metrics that are going to help us on that journey. But then it comes about them owning the narrative, right? So you might say to those teams, okay, this is the 4 things that we're going to measure across all of us, but I want each of you to pick 2 things that you're challenged with, right? So you need to think about Plandek as a load of different metrics that you can choose from that really go down to very specific use cases and very niche use cases within individual teams. So giving them the opportunity to pick, 2 for themselves, gives them a bit of ownership. They get to own the narrative. And then it's really about then just having regular conversations, right? The first, let's say, time you sit down every 2 weeks, maybe the first couple of sessions are probably going to be pretty poor from my experience, but you stick with it. And eventually the team's getting a really good cadence of kind of, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what we've tried. It's not working with this. And you see a lot of the sort of, learnings coming from, cross-pollinating from different teams and different people helping each other out, different experiences, different knowledge being shared. And ultimately, then you get that ownership then drives a sort of feeling of safety and ownership in those data points, which then actually help then drive the adoption of the teams using those metrics going forward. So I'd always, any new engineering leader being very clear on the outcome, start with a few metrics, invite your teams to pick, 1 or 2 of themselves, and then get them to own that narrative in every session that you hold with them every 2 weeks.
And then, at the team level, they've got reasonably direct control over the actions, over those kind of outcomes there. But I often think of software as a team sport, or teams of teams. So as you start to go up and you think about the director, the VP level, where now you're orchestrating multiple teams of engineers with different priorities and different dependencies between themselves. You've got interactions with product management teams, with commercial teams. How do you start to think about that dynamic and the external influences that people need to be aware of and looking for there?
I think that's where you really need to start tying in the outcomes that you're trying to drive, right? Be having a very clear understanding of revenue, engagement stats, any, cost things. Talk a lot about, AWS costs or different hosting costs, right? From a product level, you want to understand, well, the core competencies of my delivery, right? So you could use the focus, speed, quality, and predictability as the kind of cornerstone to each of those areas, but then tying those in so that we can demonstrate, when we optimize for better efficiency of delivery, we're able to get things into production, into our customers' hands, collapses feedback. That results in positive business outcomes. We see NPS scores going up. So I think it's, allowing the teams to be relatively autonomous and be able to focus on very, very niche use cases, having a more simplified view overall that kind of covers the key outcomes you're trying to drive from an engineering perspective. But then how do we ensure that those outcomes are linked to the business outcomes? Because if you're sitting down with the board or sitting down with the CEO or the CFO, they're not going to understand necessarily what the value is in cycle time intuitively, but understanding that, hey, better cycle time, better deployment frequency leads to better revenue outcomes is definitely something that they can get their head around. So it's really important at that level to start to incorporate the impact of the outcomes into your looking at.
That kind of correlation to outcomes. So, my background comes from the engineering side of the house. I'm sure a lot of people kind of recognize the dynamic of when things are going well, all the credit is clearly because sales executed incredibly well. When things are going badly, is clearly a product problem. And stereotyping, but you see that discussion in a lot of different businesses. How do you help the product engineering teams either understand what they did wrong or at least demonstrate that correlation of, here's what we're delivering and how that translates into bottom line impact?
But I think there's two parts to that question. One is the sort of leadership level communication and dealing with that question of attribution and success and failure. The other part is the team level. So what I recommend with all of our clients is get the key business KPIs into your product, like a plan deck, as early as you possibly can. So teams are constantly thinking about how what we're doing, how what we're delivering does or doesn't move the needle on certain set. And that could be, it could be engagement statistics, could be logins, could be sessions, could be time in product, whatever it is for your product, you'll know exactly what it is. But getting teams to think about that as a regular thing allows them to make better decisions around what should we be designing, what is the impact that had, not just as a competency element, in terms of how we're able to deliver, but also the things that we're delivering, how are those having the positive impacts that we expected, or are they having a muted impact and actually, we failed in that. So I think product teams having a better understanding of what are the outcomes that they're trying to drive, what is the impact that they're trying to create by this particular feature or these particular goals that they're delivering, having that data at the team level as well, so that that team can constantly keep an eye on it. Now, I don't know if I have a magical answer for the leadership question. I think those dynamics will always be a bit at play in terms of, when there's success, it's obviously the sales team's responsibility. And when there's failures, it's product and tech. But I think the more you can get ahead of that as a continuous point, and you can show continuous relationship between as we improve, as we invest in this, as our teams get better at this, as our architecture products change, allow us to deploy more frequently, over time, that correlation continues to hold. It's not 100% attributable to anyone, but you're able to then show that what we're doing here does have a positive impact ultimately on our customers' experience, which then has an impact on our top line.
And I mean, your role at Plandek gives you that kind of unique position as you think about the investments you're making in product and what you're driving, but at the same time, your kind of operational and revenue role of how does that work. So really interested how Plandek as a business kind of thinks about that trade-off and the board level discussions, how you approach it.
We're very clear on, Ray, who's our CPO, he's very clear. We sit down the board. He's very clear and is able to articulate, this is the kind of product strategy. We have these themes and this is what we're driving, so that our board is very clear thematically where we're going, why we're going there, what's going into there, and then seeing the positive impact that that's potentially having. As a technology business through and through, I think it's easier for us in some ways. We're not as, say, complicated as some other industries where you're working with a much bigger workforce and you're not necessarily a pure technology play. But we track and have the conversations on a regular basis around what is our product thesis, what are we driving each one of these different areas, what is the impact that that's having, what's the cost across those different areas. So it's a very open dialogue across each of those areas for us. And then from a revenue perspective, it's pretty straightforward for us. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward business model. It's trying to continue to win business and keep our customers happy with retention, which we've been successful so far.
And I mean, to that end, as AI kind of washes through the industry and we see that transformation unfold, what comes next for Plandek?
Our key focus really is getting better visibility, helping technology and product leaders get better visibility of how underlying inefficiency and how you work has an impact on your delivery roadmap, right? We talk a lot. The reason why we believe so heavily in good delivery, sustainable delivery patterns is because we know for a fact that that has a direct impact on the delivery itself. So we're going to be focused a lot more on bringing those two worlds together in a very clear way so that you can get a good open view across, what's coming up in your roadmap and what are the risks bubbling up underneath that are going to have a material impact on that quarter or that half year. So you see a lot more in that space. We're going to be doing a lot of work in the Gen AI space, naturally, in terms of helping. I think most technology leaders today are still really focused on who's using it and how are they using it, right? So there's a lot going into our product this year that's going to be really focused on helping technology leaders at multiple levels in an organization get their head around the adoption and the use cases, and then start to then look at different ways of thinking about impact, right? It's challenging because you get the data set you need to understand impact. You don't have the luxury of being able to control everything else in that environment that that allow you to say, okay, this is conclusively just down to Copilot or down to Cursor or whatever it might be. But trying to help build that. So that's kind of a lot of our focus is going to be particularly on that as well. That's probably what I'll mention, because CPO wouldn't want me to go into too much detail.
It's really fascinating. Thanks for coming in and spending the time with us today. Well,
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.